Why is GPS free? As far as I can remember, I never needed a paid data bundle to use GPS on my phone, and old car navigation devices didn't require a subscription to get a good GPS signal. This seems odd to me since a lot of money had to be spent on satellites when GPS was created. Why did the creators of GPS decide not to charge any money for it? User Conrolder answers, oh man. A question I can answer. I'm a GPS engineer. I'll answer this in a sort of roundabout way by explaining the history of GPS and how it works, then get into why it's used for civil application and why you don't have to pay for it. GPS was originally a U.S. Air Force program called Navstar. Navstar started in 1973. It was a spiritual follower of other navigation-based programs such as LORAN, a 2D positioning system for ships on water, and Decca, a hyperbolic radio navigator based on calculating one's position based on the intersection time of radio signals. These hyperbolic navigation systems were originally started in World War II to assist bomber runs. The idea of a space-based version of a navigation system is said to have started with the Soviet launch of Sputnik 1. A group of DoD-funded engineers at APL were tasked with figuring out where Sputnik 1 was, and because Sputnik 1 transmitted a continuous waveform, it experienced a measurable Doppler shift. If it traveled towards you, it sounded higher pitched. When it passed overhead and continued on, it had a lower pitch. In this way, a group of scientists at APL were able to figure out where Sputnik 1 was. The US DoD then began to investigate new methods for navigating off of radio signals from space specifically, eventually leading to Navstar. Navstar as a program was born near the end of Vietnam. During Vietnam, if the US wanted to destroy a bridge, they had to fly sorties over that bridge and drop bombs in the hope that one of those bombs would hit. They had a very high miss rate, caused immense collateral damage, and costed a lot of money because the accuracy of bomb drops was so low. I won't pull a reference for this, but the Thanh Hoa Bridge is a great example of this problem. Thus, the Navstar program, which would become GPS, was implemented to try to resolve the massive challenges associated with target accuracy and navigation. The Navstar program spent 25 years getting from program inception to final delivery of a full GPS constellation. You need around 30 to navigate, because they're medium Earth orbit globally orbiting satellites, and you need 4 overhead at any given time to work. It took them a while to get all of those up. GPS works by resolving the GPS-Sudornge equation through trilateration. That is, the satellites transmit 2 things, broadly. 1, their own precise position, monitored by a group of surveilled ground control monitoring stations around the world, and 2, the precise atomic reference time at which their signals are transmitted using on-board clocks occasionally updated/corrected from the ground. A receiver on the ground has a bad clock and doesn't know where it is, so it resolves a nonlinear equation with 4 unknowns, its position in 3 dimensions and its clock error, from the GPS satellites. It's hard to explain without getting into the math, but just know that in this way, all GPS receivers receive very precise timing, as well as their position, by calculating the intersection of 4 spheres. During the Navstar program, there was a big push for GPS to be provided as a civil service. For starters, it gave near-atomic clock quality time for next to nothing in cost. You get the benefit of the GPS satellite clocks on your handheld receiver, as well as instantaneous position globally. The timing, in particular, was a really big deal to the US here. The power grid requires precise timing, the stock market does, etc. The GPS program made all of those things cheaper, better, and easier. So the DoD was always considering some version of a civil service for GPS. And then in September 1983, Korean Airlines Flight 007 accidentally flew through restricted Soviet airspace and was shot down, killing 269 people. This was the final incentive that the US needed to publicly provide a GPS civil service. Another reason that the civil service was allowed was technological. The GPS satellites, which were Air Force assets, transmit a signal called PY code, which is a military GPS signal with an encrypted code. Only military receivers can use it. At the inception of GPS, it could not be directly acquired. Doing so required that you knew pretty well where you are, so the Navstar team developed something called course acquisition, which was another, worse signal that could be navigated off of in order to get good enough navigation to get to PY code. This signal was already being transmitted for military use, and by providing it for civil use, civilian users got a worse version of GPS through CA. In other words, providing civil use didn't negatively interfere with military use, made stock market and power grid work cheaper, and many other things like public infrastructure development, surveying, etc. When they first provided free to all GPS, The Air Force created selective availability, a scrambling code on the CA signal that made it worse than it normally would be, by about 10x. This made CA GPS good enough to navigate off of but not good enough for military application, as the US was worried about adversaries using it. In 2000, the US formally turned off selective availability, allowing civil use. /u/abbott_x gives a great answer as to why in the comments below. Today, the GPS program is one of the only military programs where civil services, the Department of Transportation, I believe, sits on the stakeholder committee for the branch that runs it out of AFRL, and they use it for everything. And a lot of other countries have navigation satellite constellations too now: the EU, Russia, China, Japan, and India. DR, US taxes paid for GPS, but you really get access to it because it helps the US government substantially in aviation, civil, infrastructure, economic, and military sectors, and the version of GPS that you're using is still substantially worse than the one the military uses. There's some legacy effect here too. The US originally only let civil users use an acquisition code that was never meant for navigation, whereas now they have dedicated civil use signals, mostly due to the intense peer pressure of continued civil reliance. Edit. Very incredibly kind of all of you. I've got several updates here. First, and I've fixed the post above with this: the GPS trial iteration equation is non-linear, and you can see a great visual of it here. Somebody posted this and it's very cool, and I think their comment got deleted. Second, I commented on some major differences between the different constellations here: _source equals share and _medium equals web2x and context equals 3. Third, there are a lot of comments regarding time dilation. Fun history fact: the first space-based precursor to GPS was called transit, and was the first technology that had to actively account for time dilation or stop working, and it assisted in proving Einstein's theory of relativity, or perhaps more aptly, continued to prove it. GPS does the same thing. Today it still accounts for time dilation through regular updates to the timing on board satellites. Fourth, just as a note to really try to hammer home why GPS is free, GPS is estimated to produce $1.4 trillion per year in economic gains for private sector businesses, private sector study. This is in addition to all of the governmental gains in infrastructure, transportation, aviation, power grids, stock markets, good old timing, etc. I think part of the trick here is that the US knew this would have impact that extended way beyond the already massive military application, and events like Korean Airlines 007 were a straw that broke the camel's back on that discussion. But making it free already saves the US a ton of money, both for private and public use, and that more than any other reason is why it's free.